I think it's a rather safe statement to make that the majority of anime fans hate the aesthetic of 3D anime. More often than not, the announcement of a CG show is met with a harsh, vocal negative reaction by a significant group of people online. But 3D is just an art form, isn't it? Why would a technology that has thrived in the West and dominated all of cinema and video games worldwide have such significant blowback specifically in the anime community? Well, it all comes down to its implementation. While 3D established its own visual language in mediums like Western animation and video games, CG in anime is largely used to emulate the look of the genuine article, and it's in that endeavor that I believe the animators have caused so much fuss. Anime fans who love the look of 2D anime, strangely enough, hate the same aesthetic when replicated in 3D. But why exactly is that? I think it comes down to 5 main aspects of CG anime: texturing, camera work, shading, stylization, and keyframing. Over the next 5 videos, we're going to do a deep dive on each one of these points and attempt to get to the bottom of why 3D anime fails. To understand why certain texturing aspects of 3D anime causes problems, we first have to establish how 2D generally looks and why it looks that way. Traditional anime is hand-drawn on paper, or more commonly today, drawn digitally in an animation program. Either way, in order to keep the drawings relatively easy to animate in a timely manner, outlines are generally all the same thickness, and the colors used are simple flat shades. This allows the animators to easily retain the color values of all aspects of the figures as they redraw them over and over again, to give it the illusion of a single character in motion. This is opposed to using more detailed blending or gradients like you see in the backgrounds the characters animate over. Since those typically don't ever move, they can have much more detail and use more traditional rendering techniques. This also explains why sometimes, especially in old cartoons, you can guess when something in the background is going to move before it actually does because it stands out from the rest of the environment. Since that element of the environment is going to animate, it adopts the simple flat coloring style of the characters. This technique of flat coloring is called cel shading and is the hallmark visual cue of basically all 2D animation. 3D animation, however, is completely different. Characters aren't drawn over and over like they are in 2D. Instead, they are made up of a bunch of simple polygons, usually rectangles and triangles, assembled together to form a cohesive 3D shape. These are either made by starting with simple polygon primitives and expanded into shape resembling the final object, or sculpted on the computer using what is essentially digital clay. These figures are then unwrapped, like flattening a papercraft doll, and a single 2D image is painted onto that flattened view to provide the additional details, so when it's put back into shape, the image, or texture, covers the figure and solidifies the look of the model. Because there is only a single image to draw, the limitations of 2D don't have to apply here. The texture can be as detailed as the artist wants it to be because it only has to be drawn once. You can even map high-resolution photographs to the model, and the animation process won't become any more complicated. This is why modern special effects work. A simple stick figure animates in the same amount of steps as a photorealistic human, whereas in 2D, redrawing a photorealistic character would be orders of magnitude more difficult than redrawing the simple stick figure. So, what does this have to do with 3D anime? Well, because textures can be any level of detail and aren't limited to cel shading like 2D, oftentimes 3D anime uses textures on their characters that don't conform to the limitations of cel shading in 2D. Now, normally this isn't a problem, as seen in Western animation like Pixar films, for example, but remember, 3D anime is purposely trying to look like 2D. So that means in addition to the general art style, like how the characters are drawn, they also need to keep in mind the limitations of the style, even if the medium of 3D isn't limited in the same ways. If these limitations aren't emulated, all the art direction in the world doesn't mean a damn. It's obvious that these characters aren't a drawing anymore and the illusion is broken. A fantastic example of this is in the current 2016 adaptation of Berserk and its infamous skeleton sequence from episode 1. The scene was lambasted by anime fans for having these terrible looking skeleton zombies that guts fight, but if we clear away everything for a second and actually examine the models, there's nothing really inherently wrong with them. The shape is pretty accurate to a spooky skeleton, and the art style isn't all that bad. So why did they draw so much attention? It's the texture. The textures used on the skeletons aren't using the flat, cel-shaded coloring that all the other characters in the show are attempting to mimic, instead being a painted texture more akin to the backgrounds of the show. Because of this, they don't read as a 2D character, but a 3D model moving around all choppily. It's a clash of styles that looks terrible not due to the model itself, but the context it's presented in. The skeletons aren't the only example of breaking the cell shading rule in Berserk 2016 either. Most of the character's armor has painted on details and grit that portray it as 3D, and props like the tray of food Isuto is holding right in the beginning of the episode is too detailed to be hand-drawn, like it would be if it was 2D. The list really goes on and on. All of these add up to a disjointed visual language that wants to look like a 2D anime, but is routinely ignoring the very core of that style's aesthetics and limitations. Even if the viewer can't technically explain why these things are off, years of seeing the language repeatedly makes them inherently sense these errors.
Some so subtle you might not have even noticed, but your brain did.